In 1969, people all around the world were staring at the television to see if man would actually walk on the surface of the moon. The floodgates opened for science fiction fantasies, and more humans started to believe that life out there was actually possible. The search for any evidence of life beyond Earth began growing rapidly. UFO sightings were becoming more common, and mysterious government programs were being created to study the unidentified flying objects seen by so many. Along with these strange events in the sky, more channels began opening, bringing powerful messages from other star systems.
As a first contact specialist, one of the techniques that is common to my kind is to always experience a life in the civilization we are eventually going to contact so we will understand it. That's the only way we would be able to have a translation that makes sense to you. It's got to come through someone in your civilization that is a representation of some extension of our oversoul, so that we can draw upon that information and those experiences to allow our information to make sense to you. Otherwise, we would be too alien to each other. When someone begins to learn to channel in the way that I do, I'm not really sure it's all that important to differentiate who it is you're connecting to. As long as you are staying in a positive state, you know you're bringing something through to help people, what difference does it really make at first? It could be a spirit guide. It could be another dimensional being. It could be your own higher mind. It could be another aspect of your own consciousness. The point is not really so much to focus on who it is, but what's coming through. Is what's coming through positive, constructive, helpful? Or is it controlling, ego-driven, or something like that, which is usually the channel's own issues, getting in the way and filtering the information. But that's okay. It takes practice to learn the difference. And that's actually the way it kind of unfolds, is when you get more practiced at it, if it's important for you to know where that's coming from, you will usually figure it out, or it will tell you.
When you look at channelers from around the world, and even in our study, many of them believe that the sources are not from Earth, that they're what they call off-world ally or extraterrestrial intelligences. And the story is that these beings are beneficent beings who really want to help humanity in this incredibly pivotal transitional time. And that what we're going through right now is actually this push to awakening and enlightenment for humanity. And you see this over and over again. And when you're in these sessions, hearing all this information, all this content about these off-world allies, I think it's very arrogant to think that we're alone in this universe. And so personally, I leave space for the reality that that could be true. And I don't think that a spaceship is going to show up on the White House lawn and shake hands with the president. If there are off-world allies really out there, that they're smart enough to know that that would create a crazy frenzy. And yet you hear many, many anecdotes about people who are having contact experiences in a variety of different ways around the planet. And maybe if it is going to happen, it will be this bottom-up, grassroots wave of transformation where people just then accept, okay, we're not alone, and here's how it's showing up for us.
In the 1960s, while attending the University of Louisville in Kentucky, Carla L. Ruckert joined an experimental channeling group that was being led by physics professor and paranormal researcher Don Elkins. In the early 1970s, she partnered with Don to form LL Company, which eventually became LL Research, dedicated to further their studies into paranormal activity. In December of 1980, researcher Jim McCarty joined forces with Carla and Don. 3 weeks later, the raw contact began.
I am raw. I have not spoken through this instrument before. We had to wait until she was precisely tuned as we send a narrow band vibration. We greet you in the love and in the light of our infinite Creator.
The Law of One, or the raw material, is a channeled text that came through in the early 1980s from a group of UFO researchers who had been spending the better part of over a decade researching the phenomenon of UFOs and extraterrestrials, which at that time was very active. And this group of about 12 people somehow came to the conclusion, very rightly, that if we want to really know or understand these beings that are appearing on our planet, we need to be more interested in their philosophy and their spirituality than their science and their technology. And so Don Elkins came up with the idea of using the art of channeling as a means of communication, that these beings, whatever they are, they must be able to communicate through thought. And it was many, many years later, after working with Don Elkins and Jim McCarty in this group, that she was actually trying to help teach a student how to channel one evening. And while she was teaching how to get into the channeling state, a contact came through. And it identified itself as a being named Ra of a 6-density social memory complex, to which they didn't really have an understanding of what that meant at the time.
I greet you in the love and the light of our infinite Creator. I am with this mind, body, spirit complex, which has offered itself for a channel. I communicate with you.
So over the course of the next 4 years, from 1981 to 1984, they began doing 106 sessions over that time period of the raw material, channeling this entity named Ra in a sort of question and answer format. And this was one of the imperatives of this channeling work, was that this entity said, we are beings who honor free will. So we're not here to just preach to you and just give you information, but we want to have a dialogue with you. So you can question us, and if we deem it's not a violation of your free will to know something, we'll give you our answer. But we're not going to speak with you in any other format. And this was a really important part of the Law of One material, because Dawn essentially takes Ra through a series of over 2,000 question and answer of what is the nature of the universe, what is the nature of the soul's evolution, reincarnation, the metaphysics of energy, and so forth. And Ra gives the most profound answers that I believe has ever come through a channeled work before. And so that's really what allows, I think, the Law of One to stand apart from all other channeled texts, is that it was done in this group format that Ra says also just having other people there also brought in more strength for the contact itself to come through.
The reception of our being is a somewhat more advanced feat than some of the more broad vibration channels opened by other members for more introductory and intermediate work.
When we get into channeling beings of higher densities, the process of channeling becomes very nuanced and delicate, because depending on the level of density of the entity we're contacting, it requires different degrees of lucidity or trance, perhaps. So for example, beings of higher densities like 6th density require a very narrow band of channeling that requires one to really be in a trance state. And this is the state Carla had to be in for the Law of One sessions. whereas a lower density being like a fourth density entity, which is, people who can channel while they're on stage giving a talk. They can connect with those beings, because really in a non-trance state, we're receiving information intuitively, feeling impressions and information that we can condense through our own language. So there's kind of a relationship between the entity being channeled and the channeler, in that the entity is allowing the channeler to sort of paraphrase for them the essence of what they're trying to say. But it isn't necessarily a word-for-word communication.